Conflict arising from excessive ego, psychological roots, and social consequences. This article explores the psychological foundations and social consequences of conflict caused by excessive ego. It draws on theories from personality psychology, organizational behavior, and social dynamics to explain how an inflated sense of self can obstruct communication, fuel interpersonal tensions, and damage collaboration. The article also discusses real-world implications in workplace environments, intimate relationships, and leadership contexts, and proposes strategies for ego management to foster healthier human interactions. Ego, often conceptualized as the self-concept or identity, plays a central role in shaping human behavior. While a healthy ego contributes to confidence and resilience, an excessive ego, characterized by inflated self-importance, defensiveness, and an inability to accept criticism, can become a major source of conflict in interpersonal and group settings. This paper investigates the roots of ego-driven conflict and its pervasive impact across various domains of life. The theoretical framework. Certainly. Here's an expanded explanation for the 1-point Freudian and humanistic perspectives section of the article. A theoretical framework, 1-point Freudian and humanistic perspectives. Freudian perspective. Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory conceptualizes the mind as comprising three key structures: the ID, ego, and superego. The id represents primal desires and instinctual drives. The superego represents internalized societal norms and morality, and the ego serves as the rational mediator between the two. In Freud's view, a well-functioning ego maintains balance, allowing a person to meet their desires in socially acceptable ways. However, when the ego becomes overly dominant or defensive, often as a protection against perceived threats to self-worth or identity, it can distort reality through defense mechanisms such as denial, projection, or rationalization. For example, a person with an inflated ego may project their own faults onto others, or rationalize poor behavior rather than accept personal accountability. This distorted perception of reality often results in interpersonal conflict, as the individual becomes resistant to feedback, unable to empathize, and quick to interpret disagreement as a personal attack. Humanistic perspective. The humanistic approach, particularly the work of Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, offers a contrasting view that centers on the self-concept and the innate human drive toward self-actualization. According to Rogers, psychological conflict arises when there is an incongruence between a person's self-image, how they view themselves, and their ideal self, how they wish to be. An excessive ego attempts to mask this incongruence by creating a rigid self-concept that resists any information that could threaten it. For instance, a person who sees themselves as highly competent may reject constructive criticism because it clashes with their idealized self-view. This defensive stance creates a communication barrier and may lead to recurring conflicts, particularly in situations requiring collaboration or emotional openness. From a humanistic lens, ego-driven conflict can be resolved through unconditional positive regard, empathy, and genuine self-reflection. In practice, this means helping individuals recognize their vulnerabilities and accept their imperfections, which can reduce the emotional charge that fuels conflict. 2. Social identity and self-enhancement theories. Social identity theory. Developed by Henri Tajfel and John Turner in the 1970s, social identity theory proposes that a significant part of an individual's self-concept is derived from their membership in social groups, e.g., nationality, profession, religion, or political affiliation. People seek to maintain a positive social identity by favoring their in-groups and distinguishing themselves from out-groups. In the context of ego and conflict, problems arise when an individual's ego becomes overly attached to group identity. Any criticism or challenge directed toward the group is perceived as a personal threat. This heightened sensitivity can trigger defensive or aggressive behaviors, such as dismissiveness, stereotyping, or direct hostility toward others. For instance, in organizational settings, departments or teams may experience friction when their identities and contributions are not equally recognized or respected, leading to intergroup conflict rooted in ego-driven loyalty. Self-enhancement theory. Self-enhancement is the psychological tendency to maintain or increase one's sense of self-worth. According to this theory, individuals are motivated to view themselves in a favorable light and will engage in behaviors or cognitive processes such as selective attention, self-serving bias, and downward comparison to protect or boost their ego. In interpersonal contexts, this drive for self-enhancement can lead individuals to inflate their accomplishments, dominate conversations, or downplay the contributions of others. When their self-view is challenged, e.g., through criticism, disagreement, or perceived disrespect, they may react with disproportionate hostility or resentment, resulting in conflict escalation. For example, a manager who derives ego validation from being seen as the most competent may feel threatened by a talented subordinate. Rather than encouraging growth, the manager might undermine or ignore the subordinate's input, causing workplace tension and demoralization. Interplay of the two theories. Together, social identity and self-enhancement theories explain how both group affiliation and personal self-esteem become entangled with ego. Individuals not only seek to feel good about themselves, but also about the groups they belong to. When either is threatened, whether through external critique or internal insecurity, ego-based conflicts are likely to emerge as people fight to defend their identity or status. This helps explain a wide range of social phenomena, from minor workplace disputes to large-scale ideological or cultural clashes, where the underlying issue is not just disagreement, but a perceived threat to identity and ego. Manifestations of ego-driven conflict. 1. Workplace and organizational settings. The workplace is a fertile ground for ego-driven conflict due to the constant interplay of status, recognition, competition, and collaboration. In such environments, individuals often tie their self-worth to their position, achievements, or perceived competence, making the ego highly sensitive to any perceived threats or slights. A leadership and management dynamics. Leaders with an excessive ego may adopt authoritarian or narcissistic styles, prioritizing personal control, admiration, and loyalty over team collaboration and innovation. Such leaders often reject dissenting opinions, seeing them as personal challenges rather than constructive input. Take credit for team success while deflecting blame onto others during failures. Suppress high-performing subordinates to avoid feeling overshadowed. This behavior not only stifles creativity, but also breeds resentment and disengagement among team members. It can also create a culture of fear and sycophancy, where employees are more concerned with appeasing the leader's ego than pursuing organizational goals. Peer-to-peer conflicts. Among colleagues, ego-driven conflict may arise from competition for recognition, promotions, or perceived status within the group. Common manifestations include refusal to collaborate or share information due to a desire to own success, undermining colleagues through gossip, subtle sabotage, or public criticism to maintain superiority, defensiveness or hostility when receiving feedback, especially in performance evaluations or team retrospectives. Such dynamics deteriorate trust and reduce overall team cohesion, leading to a toxic work environment that impairs both productivity and morale. Impact on organizational culture. When ego-driven behavior is left unchecked, it can spread throughout the organizational culture. Egocentric environments often reward individualism over teamwork, foster hierarchical silos where information hoarding becomes a norm, devalue humility, empathy, and emotional intelligence. The long-term consequences include high employee turnover, poor innovation, and reputational damage, especially in industries that rely on collaboration and adaptability. Case example: Consider a scenario where a project manager insists on micromanaging every detail of a project, not out of necessity, but due to a deep-seated belief that no one else can match their competence. Team members become disengaged, communication slows, and deadlines are missed due to lack of ownership. Rather than accepting responsibility, the manager blames the team, deepening the conflict and leading to attrition. This is a classic example of how excessive ego in leadership disrupts workflow and damages team trust. 2. Personal and intimate relationships. Personal and intimate relationships, such as those between spouses, family members, or close friends, are emotionally charged environments where the ego plays a central role in shaping communication, emotional safety, and mutual respect. When ego becomes excessive or overprotective in these relationships, conflict is often inevitable and deeply personal. Inability to admit. Fault one of the most common ego-driven behaviors in intimate relationships is the refusal to admit being wrong. A person with a heightened ego may interpret any suggestion of error or responsibility as a threat to their self-image. As a result, rather than acknowledging their role in a disagreement, they justify their actions defensively, shift blame onto their partner or others, reframe the situation to maintain a sense of superiority or innocence. This erodes trust and emotional intimacy over time, as the partner on the receiving end feels unheard and invalidated. D. Need to win arguments. Excessive ego can transform healthy disagreements into battles for dominance, where the goal is no longer understanding or resolution, but winning. This results in escalated conflicts over minor issues, use of sarcasm, manipulation, or emotional blackmail, prioritization of being right over being compassionate. This competitive mindset turns conversations into confrontations and undermines the collaborative nature of a strong relationship. Emotional invalidations and dismissiveness. Individuals with an overactive ego may struggle to validate the emotions or experiences of their partners, especially when those experiences contradict their self-perception. They may dismiss the partner's feelings as overreactions, mock emotional vulnerability, avoid accountability by intellectualizing or minimizing issues. Over time, this creates emotional distance, resentment, and a sense of loneliness within the relationship. D. Fear of vulnerability. At its core, excessive ego in personal relationships is often a defense mechanism against vulnerability. Admitting fault, expressing need, or showing emotional pain is perceived as weakness. To avoid this perceived weakness, individuals may build emotional walls, avoid deep conversations, use humor, detachment, or criticism to deflect emotional exposure. Ironically, these very strategies undermine the emotional connection and security that intimate relationships are built upon. Family dynamics and intergenerational conflict. Ego-driven conflict is not limited to romantic relationships. In family dynamics, especially in hierarchical relationships like parent-child or sibling rivalries, ego may manifest in the form of controlling behavior by parents unwilling to accept a child's independence, power struggles between siblings for approval, resources, or dominance, unresolved childhood wounds that continue to fuel conflict into adulthood. In these cases, the ego may be acting to protect long-standing identities or roles, making conflict particularly complex and emotionally intense. F. Case example. Consider a couple where one partner insists on making all financial decisions without consulting the other. When questioned, they respond with irritation or belittlement, arguing that they know better or are more responsible. The underlying issue isn't just finances. It's an ego that refuses to share control or accept that the other partner is equally capable. Over time, this creates a sense of inequality, emotional resentment, and frequent conflict. 3. Political and social arenas. In political and social contexts, ego-driven conflict is amplified on a much larger scale. Here, individual egos are often reinforced by ideological beliefs, group identities, or positions of power, turning personal insecurity or pride into public discord. When leaders, influencers, or community members allow ego to dominate their actions and decisions, the results can be divisive, polarizing, and sometimes catastrophic. A. Ego in political leadership history shows that some of the most damaging political conflicts have been driven not by policy disagreements, but by leaders' egos. Political figures with inflated egos often refuse to admit failure or change course even when evidence contradicts their position. Silence dissent, viewing criticism as betrayal or personal attack rather than constructive input. Prioritize legacy over truth, making decisions based on how they want to be remembered rather than on the well-being of their citizens. This can lead to authoritarianism, corruption, and poor governance, as well as international conflict when egos collide between competing powers. B. Polarization and ideological rigidity. In the broader social arena, ego contributes significantly to ideological polarization. Individuals often intertwine their self-worth with their beliefs, religious, political, cultural, or ethical. As a result, opposing views are not just seen as different, but as dangerous or morally inferior. Debates devolve into personal attacks rather than thoughtful exchanges. Social media becomes a battleground where likes and retweets feed the ego, encouraging louder, more extreme expressions of belief. This rigidity fuels tribalism, where people feel threatened by difference and seek comfort in echo chambers, making conflict more likely and reconciliation more difficult. C. Activism and social movements. Even within noble causes such as human rights, environmentalism, or anti-corruption movements, ego can distort intentions. Activists may begin with altruistic goals, but, over time, become attached to identity, recognition, or moral superiority, which can lead to infighting within movements, where ego clashes over leadership, strategy, or credit weaken collective efforts. Virtue signaling, where the appearance of moral correctness becomes more important than the actual impact. Intolerance toward nuance or compromise, as individuals seek to defend a black and white view of right and wrong. In such cases, the ego not only undermines unity but also alienates potential allies. Media and public discourse. Modern media and social platforms amplify ego-driven conflict by rewarding visibility over substance. The more emotionally charged or controversial a statement is, the more attention it garners. This creates an environment where public figures are incentivized to escalate conflict rather than resolve it. Personal attacks and viral outrage replace thoughtful discourse. Civil conversations are drowned out by ego-fueled performances. Case example. Consider a political leader engaged in a diplomatic conflict who refuses to compromise or de-escalate tensions because doing so would appear weak to their base. Despite clear evidence that negotiation would benefit both countries, the leader continues to escalate, risking national security. Here, ego takes precedence over rational strategy, and conflict escalates unnecessarily due to the leader's desire to maintain pride and dominance. Psychological mechanisms behind ego conflicts. 1. Cognitive dissonance. When reality challenges an individual's inflated self-image, discomfort ensues. This leads to defensive behaviors such as denial, projection, or rationalization. 2. Narcissistic traits. High levels of narcissism, entitlement, need for admiration, lack of empathy are strongly correlated with conflict-prone behavior. 3. Fear of vulnerability. Excessive ego often masks deep-seated fear of being wrong, seen as weak or emotionally exposed. Social and cultural amplifiers of ego-driven conflict. While ego is a psychological construct rooted in the individual, its expression and escalation are heavily influenced by the social and cultural environment. Certain societal norms, values, and systems amplify ego-driven behavior and, in turn, increase the likelihood and intensity of conflict. These amplifiers often operate subtly, shaping how individuals define success, worth, and identity. 1. Individualistic versus collectivistic cultures. In individualistic cultures, e.g., the United States, much of Western Europe, personal achievement, autonomy, and self expression are highly valued. While these values can promote innovation and confidence, they can also encourage ego inflation, particularly when self worth becomes tied to being seen as unique, superior, or dominant. This fosters environments where competition is normalized, even in collaborative settings. Admitting fault is seen as weakness. Assertiveness can easily become arrogance. In contrast, collectivistic cultures, e.g., Japan, many Southeast Asian and African societies, tend to emphasize group harmony, shared responsibility, and social hierarchy. While these cultures may suppress overt ego displays, ego-driven conflict can still arise, often in more covert or passive-aggressive forms, when individuals feel slighted, dishonored, or restricted by rigid social roles. Second, media and celebrity culture. Modern media, particularly reality television, influencer marketing, and social media platforms, glorifies egocentric behavior. Traits such as dominance in debates, public humiliation of opponents, self-aggrandizement or branding of the self are not only normalized but celebrated and monetized. Individuals begin to emulate these behaviors, consciously or unconsciously, believing that loudness equals leadership and confidence equals correctness. This media landscape encourages narcissistic tendencies, such as the need for constant validation, the rejection of criticism, and the pursuit of personal fame at the expense of communal well-being. When such traits permeate social discourse, ego-driven conflict becomes both more visible and more volatile. 3. Social media echo chambers. Digital algorithms on platforms like Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube are designed to show users content that aligns with their preferences and beliefs. This creates echo chambers that reinforce the ego by validating opinions without challenge, filtering out dissenting views, fostering black and white thinking. As a result, individuals become less tolerant of opposing perspectives, more reactive to disagreement, and more prone to dehumanizing those with different beliefs, all of which escalate ego-based conflict in online and offline interactions. 4. Education and parenting styles. Certain education systems and parenting models unintentionally amplify ego through overpraise, overprotection, or unrealistic expectations. Children raised in environments where they are never allowed to fail or be challenged may develop fragile egos that crumble under criticism, lash out when not rewarded or recognized, struggle with empathy and cooperation. In adulthood, these individuals may become leaders or influencers who equate disagreement with disrespect and who are ill-equipped to handle conflict constructively. 5. Economic and class pressures. In societies with wide economic disparities or hyper-competitive job markets, individuals are often encouraged to assert their status through material success, dominance in social roles, or aggressive self-promotion. The ego becomes a survival mechanism, and conflict arises when others are seen as threats to status or opportunity. Resources and recognition are perceived as zero-sum. Identity is tightly bound to career or income, making any challenge to that identity feel existential. In summary, social and cultural amplifiers create the stage upon which individual egos perform. From media influences to economic structures, these factors shape how ego manifests and how conflict is triggered or suppressed. Understanding these amplifiers is essential not only for managing personal relationships or workplace dynamics, but also for creating healthier, more empathetic communities that reward humility and collaboration over pride and division. Strategies for managing ego in conflict. 1. Self-awareness training. Encouraging reflection and emotional literacy helps individuals recognize when ego is driving their responses. 2. Constructive feedback mechanisms. Providing feedback that focuses on behavior rather than identity reduces defensive reactions. 3. Mediation and third party facilitation. In organizational or political contexts, neutral mediators can help depersonalize disputes. 4. Mindfulness and ego dissolution practices. Techniques from Eastern philosophy, such as meditation, emphasize the impermanence of ego and foster compassion. 5. Leadership development. Leaders should be trained to prioritize humility, servant leadership, and psychological safety over dominance and control. Ego is an essential component of human identity, but when unchecked, it becomes a source of chronic interpersonal and societal conflict. Understanding the psychological drivers and manifestations of excessive ego provides a pathway for reducing friction and fostering more constructive, empathetic human relations. Future research should examine the role of digital technology in exacerbating ego driven behavior and explore interventions across age groups and cultures.